All rise for the arrival of the Honorable Senate President and the Senators of the Republic of the Philippines.
The sixth session of the Senate, the second regular session of the 19th Congress is hereby called to order. The chamber will be led in prayer by distinguished Deputy Minority Floor Leader Senator Risa Ontiveros.
Sa ngalan ng Ama at ng Anak at ng Espiritu Santo. Amen. Dahil kapistahan ni San Ignacio de Loyola noong Lunes, panalangin niya na isinatula ni Paring Bert S.J. Pagbigyan mo lamang. Kunin mo poon itong buo kong kalayaan. Tanggapin ang gunita, isip ko't kalooban. Sa iyo naman galing, tanang hawak at taglay. Sa iyo ko rin muling lahat ay iaalay. Buong kusang loob kong isinusuko sa iyo. Ikaw na pong bahala, loob ko ang loob mo. O pagbigyan mo lamang na ikaw ay mahalin. Sapat na pong biyaya, wala nang hihilingin. At dahil kaarawan ngayon ni Majority Leader Joel Villanueva, pinapanalangin din po namin, O Panginoon, ang inyong pagbabasbas sa Kanya. Amen. Sa ngalan ng Ama at ng Anak, ng Espiritu Santo. Amen. Happy birthday.
Yes, we'd like to also greet a very, very happy birthday once again to our hardworking, dedicated Majority Floor Leader, Senator Joel Villanueva. Secretary, please call the roll of members.
Call of members. The Honorable Senator Angara, Senator Binay, Senator Cayetano Alan, Senator Cayetano Pia, Senator De La Rosa, Senator Ejercito, Senator Escudero, Senator Estrada, Senator Gatchalian, Senator Go, Senator Ontiveros, Senator Lapid, Senator Legarda, Senator Marcos, Senator Padilla, Senator Pimentel, Senator Poe, Senator Revilla, Senator Tolentino, Senator Tulfo, Senator Villanueva, Senator Villar Cynthia, Senator Villar Mark, the Senate President.
With 23 senators present, the chair declares the presence of a quorum. Majority Leader.
Yes, Mr. President, before we move forward, may I just be allowed to acknowledge some guests from the gallery. Guests of Senator Estrada from DFA, ASEC Charlie Manangan, Deputy ASEC Mersole Melejor, guests of Senator Ontiveros and Legarda, officials of the local government of Sablayan, Occidental Mindoro, led by Mayor Walter Marquez and Vice Mayor Edwin Mintu, and guests of our Senate President, Mig Zubiri, Stephanie Zubiri Crespi, Sebastian Zubiri Crespi, Maximilian Zubiri Crespi, and Scott Woodward is with us in this August chamber. We welcome them in this August chamber, Mr. President.
Yes, we welcome all our guests to your Senate, most especially my sister. I believe it's her first time to visit the Senate, together with her children, Maxi, Sebastian, and her partner, Scott Woodward. Welcome to the Senate, everyone.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Grace Poe is whispering something here. The better Zubiri, Mr. President.
Absolutely.
Mr. President, at this juncture, I move that we dispense with the reading of the journals of the 76th session of the first regular session, May 30, 2023, and fifth session, Tuesday, August the 1st, 2023, and consider them as approved. So move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
Mr. President, I move that we proceed with the reference of business.
There being no objection to the motion of the Majority Floor Leader, we ask the Secretary to proceed with the reference of business.
Resolution, Senate Concurrent Number 14, granting consent to Lieutenant General Romeo S. Bonner Jr., Chief of Staff of the AFP, to receive the Legion of Merit Award from the Government of the United States of America. Senator Zubiri.
To the Committee on Rules.
708, honoring and commending the 42 Bataha Management Office Rangers for winning the 2023 International Union for the Conservation of Nature World Commission on Protected Areas International Ranger Award on July 26, 2023 in Gland, Switzerland. Senator Binay.
To the Committee on Rules.
709, urging the Senate Committee on Justice and Human Rights to conduct an inquiry into the discovery of a mass grave at a septic tank inside the maximum security compound of the new Bilibid prison. Senator Tolentino.
To the Committee on Justice and Human Rights.
710, expressing the profound sympathy and sincere condolences of the Senate on the death of Honorable Corazon P. Nunez Malaniaon, the Governor of the Province of Davao Oriental. Senator Villar C.
To the Committee on Rules.
711, commending and congratulating the Filipino keglers for winning gold medals in the 21st Asian Youth 10-pin Bowling Championship held at the Blue Rhythm Bowl in Bangkok, Thailand. Senator Go.
To the Committee on Rules.
712, commending and congratulating the members of the Gilas Women's National Team for reigning supreme in Division B of the FIBA U16 Women's Asian Championship. Senator Go.
To the Committee on Rules.
713, commending and congratulating the members of the Philippine Pirate teams for their outstanding performance in winning 5th overall championship in the 2023 Southeast Asian Para Games held in Cambodia. Senator Go.
To the Committee on Rules.
714, commending and congratulating Johan Chua and James Aranas for their victory in the 2023 World Cup of Pool held in Spain. Senator Go.
To the Committee on Rules.
715, commending and congratulating the Filipinas women's football team for the historic victory against the New Zealand team in the 2023 FIFA Women's World Cup held in Wellington, New Zealand. Senator Go.
To the Committee on Rules.
716, congratulating and commending Makati Football Club for winning the Gothia World Youth Cup held at Gothenburg, Sweden, and in Cup number 1 at Frederikshavn, Denmark, introduced by Senator Go.
To the Committee on Rules.
717, directing the appropriate Senate committee to conduct an inquiry on the adequacy and effectiveness of the national government's existing flood control system and flood control interventions amidst extreme weather conditions brought about by climate change, global warming, and global boiling. Senator Marcos.
Committee on Public Works, Environment, Natural Resources, and Climate Change. There's additional reference of business. Please proceed.
Additional reference of business bills on first reading, Senate number 2306, defining and penalizing fraudulent activities involving bank accounts, e-wallets, and other financial accounts and for other purposes. Senator Villanueva.
To the Committees on Banks, Financial Institutions, Justice, Human Rights, and Finance.
2307, modernizing the Philippine Coast Guard, creating for the purpose the Philippine Coast Guard Modernization Trust Fund, appropriating funds, and for other purposes. Senator Villanueva.
Committees on Public Services, National Defense, and Unification, and Finance.
2308, creating a tax-free minors deposit account, amending for the purpose PD 1158. Senator Villar M.
To the Committees on Ways and Means, Banks and Financial Institutions, and Currencies.
2309, providing free legal assistance to any officer or uniformed personnel of the AFP, the BFP, the BJMP, the Philippine Coast Guard, PNP, facing any charge before the prosecutor's office, court, or other similar office arising from incident related to the performance of official duty, appropriating funds therefore. Senator Villar M.
To the Committees on National Defense, Security, Unification, Public Order, Dangerous Drugs, and Finance.
2310, establishing state-of-the-art animation facilities and infrastructure in the Philippines to promote a competitive environment for the animation industry, appropriating funds therefore. Senator Villar M.
Committees on Public Information, Mass Media, and Finance.
2311, strengthening the special program in creative arts for junior and senior high school, appropriating funds therefore. Senator Villar M.
Committees on Basic Education, Culture and Arts, Ways and Means, and Finance.
2312, mandating the TESDA to design and implement technical vocational education and training and livelihood programs specifically for rehabilitated drug dependents and appropriating funds therefore. Senator Villar M.
Committees on Higher Technical Vocational Education and Finance.
2313, establishing the e-books for the barangay program, providing funds therefore. Senator Villar M.
Committees on Basic Education, Local Government, and Finance.
2314, enhancing workers' protection and skills development in course of digital economy for job disruption. Senator Villar M.
Committees on Labor and Employment and Finance.
2315, establishing nursery and childcare facilities proximate to public schools, promoting access to affordable childcare facilities for public school teachers and for other purposes. Senator Villar M.
Committees on Women and Children and Finance.
2316, instituting a comprehensive earthquake monitoring and early warning system, appropriating funds therefore and for other purposes. Senator Villar M.
Committees on Science and Technology and Finance.
2317, mandating the inclusion of digital skills and relevant technology courses in the educational curriculum, providing funds therefore and for other purposes, Senator Villar M.
Committees on Basic Education, Science and Technology and Finance.
2318, establishing a national youth environmental advocacy and sustainability program, appropriating funds and for other purposes, Senator Villar M.
Committees on Youth, Environment, Natural Resources and Finance.
2319, converting the Sulu State College in the municipality of Holop, province of Sulu, into a state university to be known as the Sulu State University and appropriating funds therefore, Senator Marcos.
Committees on Higher Technical and Vocational Education, Ways and Means and Finance.
2320, providing for the sustainable management of forests and forest lands, Senator Legarda.
Committees on Environment, Natural Resources, Ways and Means and Finance.
2321, implementing the right of the people to information on matters of public concern guaranteed under Section 7, Article 3 of the 1987 Constitution, and the state policy of full public disclosure of all its transactions involving public interest under Section 28, Article 2 of the 1987 Constitution, and for other purposes, Senator Legarda.
The Committees on Public Information, Mass Media, Civil Service, Government Reorg, and Professional Regulation.
2322, establishing a special economic zone in Freeport in the province of Antique, providing funds therefore and for other purposes, Senator Legarda.
Committees on Economic Affairs, Local Government, Ways and Means and Finance.
2323, promoting soil and water conservation technologies and approaches for sustainable land management in the Philippines and for other purposes, Senator Legarda.
Committees on Agriculture, Food and Agrarian Reform, Environment, Natural Resources and Finance.
2324, declaring Quiapo District in the city of Manila a national heritage zone, appropriating funds and for other purposes, Senator Legarda.
To the Committees on Culture and Arts, Tourism and Finance.
2325, lowering the optional retirement age of government workers from 60 years to 56 years, amending Section 13A of RA 8291, Senator Legarda.
Committees on Civil Service, Government Corporations and Finance.
2326, amending certain provisions of RA 8293, Senator Legarda.
Committee on Trade and Commerce and Entrepreneurship.
2327, establishing a multi-species marine hatchery in the municipality of Santa Catalina, province of Ilocos Sur, appropriating funds therefore, Senator Villar C.
Committees on Agriculture and Food and Finance.
Communications, letter from the GSIS submitting to the Senate the report on the GSIS investment portfolio as of December 31, 2022, in compliance with Section 36 of RA 8291.
To the Committee on Government and Corporation Public Enterprises.
Letter from the Supreme Court of the Philippines furnishing the Senate a copy of resolution issued by the Court en banc dated February 21, 2023, which reads as follows. Administrative Matter number 220815 SC, concurrence to the Philippines' accession to the Hague Conventions on Judgments and Evidence. Creation of a technical working group to study the necessity and feasibility of amending the rules of civil procedure and evidence to facilitate and improve mutual judicial cooperation with other states or countries involving the recognition and enforcement of foreign judgments and the taking of evidence in civil or commercial matters.
Referred to Committees on Foreign Relations, Justice and Human Rights. Session suspended for 1 minute. Majority.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, at this juncture and with the permission of the body, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 2024 under Committee Report number 70. This is the bill on ease of paying taxes, part of the LEDAC, Mr. President.
Wasn't that the bill we passed last week? O iba yun?
The Tiboro,
Session
Mr. President. That's the Tiboro, Mr. President. That's the Tiboro.
Okay. Session resumed. My apologies. I thought we had passed that last week. Your Honor.
It's the Tiboro, Mr.
Yeah, it's
President.
a
And then we
different
passed
measure.
yesterday on second reading the income classification, LGU income classification, Mr. President.
Yes, there being no objection to the motion, motion is approved.
Yes, Mr. President. The parliamentary status, Mr. President, of this measure is that we have sponsored the bill. And with that, I move to open the period of interpellation and recognize the sponsor, Senator Win Gatchalian, and to interpellate our minority leader, Senator Coco Pimentel III. So
The
moved, Mr.
distinguished chairman of the Committee on Ways and Means, Senator Gatchalian, is recognized and to interpolate our distinguished minority floor leader, Senator Coco Pimentel III.
Topics na. Thank you, Mr. President. With the permission of our hardworking chairman, multi-talented, multifaceted, kahit anong subject matter, Mr. President. Nandito na tayo sa tax ngayon. With this permission, we can start with the interpellation on Senate Bill number 2224. But I don't think we can finish this today, Mr. President, if we could just start the interpellation.
Yes, Mr. President. Thank you very much, Minority Leader.
Mr. President, this bill has the potential of becoming another landmark law if it will live up to its objectives, Mr. President. The title of the act shall be known as the Ease of Paying Taxes Act. So if we can just focus on the main objective of the bill as reflected in its title, can the sponsor tell us what are the new ideas or innovative concepts found in the bill which will really help our taxpayers in paying their taxes?
Thank you, Minority Leader. Thank you very much for the question. There are three overarching goals of the ease of paying taxes proposal, Mr. President. The first one is digitalization. So the aim of this proposal is to fully digitalize the payment of taxes, including the filing of returns. And then second, Mr. President, is focus on MSMEs. As we all know, MSMEs almost comprise 90% of our taxpayers. And then number three is simplification, Mr. President. So we aim to simplification.
Certification?
Simplification.
Simplification is.
So we aim to also simplify some of the documentary requirements, Mr. President. So those are the overarching in a simple manner, Mr. President, the three overarching goals of the proposal, Mr. President.
Thank you for that, Mr. President. So if we can go over each one, Mr. President. So this bill provides for the digitalization of our tax processes, specifically the filing of returns. Will this be now made mandatory, Mr. President? How about, because it might not achieve the third goal, which is simplification, because if this is mandatory now, I mean, some people are still allergic to using computers, or if they know how to use computers, they may not be able to navigate kasi kahit na on paper na, tax matters are very complicated, Mr. President. Ngayon, online pa, on the screen, you look at all the forms, Mr. President. Because in the analog way of doing things, if you use paper, you can look at page 1, then you can jump to page 4, page 5 of the return. So you have this flexibility, Mr. President, to help the user or the one to accomplish the form. In this particular case, paglipat mo sa page 5, you can no longer, you jump to page 1. Baka mas mahirap po, Mr. President. Is this mandatory now?
But Mr. President, we will still provide for manual payment and filing of returns, Mr. President.
Manual.
But there are only two options now that we will be prescribing under the proposal, Mr. President. A manual process, if ever the taxpayer will still want to file his returns and pay taxes through manual process. And the other one is digital process. And the digital process, Mr. President, we will include in the bill, in the period of amendments, a roadmap for digitalization, Mr. President. So, in other words, it's not only prescribing, it's not in the bill yet, no, Mr. President, but we'll be proposing later on in the period of amendments, a roadmap for digitalization. So it's not only giving it two methods, but also mandating government to come up with a digitalization roadmap and report to Congress on the progress of the digitalization roadmap. That's on the digitalization side. On the manual side, Mr. President, if you go through the bill, Mr. President, we also allowed filing of returns anywhere. So right now, when you are a taxpayer in a specific RDO, you only file your returns there, no? But right now, we will allow the taxpayers to file anywhere and pay anywhere, no, Mr. President. So that is going to make the life of the taxpayer much easier because he can now pay and file anywhere. And this will also go for all types of taxes, income taxes, VAT, estate taxes, as well as donor taxes and the other forms, Mr. President. So those are, in a nutshell, is a way to make the life of our taxpayer easier by filing and paying anywhere, and also having that option to file and pay digitally, Mr. President.
So if the bill becomes law, paper filing will be accepted in all revenue district offices, okay, no matter where the taxpayer is registered.
Yes, Mr. President.
Alam ng BIR yan.
Yes, Mr. President, they were present. Well, they're here, but they were present during the hearing and all the technical working groups. And admittedly, it was a long discussion, no, because there'll be administrative changes in terms of internal processes. But if you want to achieve ease of paying taxes and make the lives of our taxpayer easier, then it's government who should be adjusting to the needs of our taxpayers. And they agreed eventually to adjust their internal processes.
Yung pay your taxes anywhere, kaya na medyo nasanay na rin siguro tayo niyan because banks can di ba?
Yes, Mr.
You
President.
can pay through a bank which is not
Any authorized.
within the territory of your revenue district office.
Yeah.
That's allowed, di ba?
In fact, Mr. President, because I guess one good thing that came out of the pandemic is the BIR also adjusted, no? So it's actually allowed now that you can pay in any authorized agent bank, Mr. President. But we're putting it in a bigger digitalization concept, Mr. President.
Yes, ngayon you have to go to the bank and pay. Tama po ba yan, Mr. President?
Yes, Mr.
You have to
President.
go to the bank. But can you digitally pay the bank also?
Yes, Mr. President.
Pwede na
Yes,
rin pala.
Mr. President.
So nothing will change on that aspect, Mr. President. Ganun pa rin. Under this bill, parang ganun yun.
Yes, parang ganun na rin,
Whatever
Mr.
is your
President.
tax due, you can go online and then pay through your bank digitally. Okay.
Yes,
Thank you.
Mr. President, correct.
So, but is there a long-term plan, Mr. President?
Yeah,
Is there a long-term plan to finally abandon the manual filing process?
That's a very good question, Mr. President. That's the amendment that we'll be introducing later on during the period of amendments. Upon internally discussing with our team, we want to introduce an amendment wherein there will be a roadmap for digitalization. And the roadmap aims to digitalize all facets of filing your returns as well as paying your taxes, but also making it easy and intuitive for our taxpayers. You're right, it's not enough to just put everything online. No? It has to be easy to use, intuitive, it has to be easy for the taxpayers to navigate and use the website. So those will be spelled out in a roadmap that will be submitted to Congress and reported periodically on its progress.
Thank you for that, Mr. President. So I think it's best for us to defer at the moment a policy decision on that particular topic, whether we will ultimately abandon the manual way of
Yeah.
filing returns. So
I think
if the bill can be written in such a way that there cannot be an interpretation that that is already, a decision has already been made on that regard, Mr. President.
But Mr. President, the bill is written that two options or two methods are still available, no? The manual
Okay.
process and the digital process. But during our, I remember during the briefing with the BIR, actually it was the old commissioner who briefed us, but she mentioned that the direction is to digitalize the collections and transactions in BIR. So having noted that, the direction, actually, if not only BIR, but the whole government is to digitalize all of its processes and services. So I think it's really, we need to institutionalize that through a law, that digitalization should be put in a plan or in a roadmap that should be submitted to Congress. And but taking note that still a part of our constituents will want to avail the manual process. So there's the option still there, but the roadmap is very important so that there will be a sense of direction on where digitalization should go.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. President. For as long as, I think that's okay, okay with this representation, for as long as there is no possible interpretation of the bill as already, already making the decision that ultimately we can only file our tax returns digitally and pay digitally. So wag muna, kung pwede.
Yeah.
Wag muna sanang any wording to that effect dito sa panukalang ito.
Mr. President, I acknowledge the comment of the minority leader. In fact, in Valenzuela, I remember when we tried to fully digitalize, meaning no human interaction in terms of payment of local taxes, we got reaction from our micro, small businesses that they find comfort in going to City Hall, paying physically, getting their physical receipt. There's still a segment of our society who finds comfort in that human interaction. So while we are still trying to promote the digital culture in our country, we will give our taxpayers an option, whether to avail of that manual process or a digital process. But then again, like I said, the whole world's moving digital. So we need to make sure that our revenue authorities are also moving into that direction.
That is what this representation will be looking for, Mr. President. Wala munang there should be no words.
Yeah,
to the
I
effect
get your
that
point,
we have
Mr.
already made the
Minority
decision.
Leader.
But at any rate, Mr. President, from those who are doing things digitally, paying some things digitally or paying taxes digitally, filing tax returns digitally, they tell me that they still print out
Yeah.
the
You're-
form and then they print out the
Yeah.
digital receipt or whatever
Yeah,
receipt is
that's
given
true,
to them,
Mr.
and then they attach the receipt to the form. So
That's true, Mr. President. There's this misconception that if you upload the forms and print it as PDF, it's already digital. No? Mr. President, that's a misconception. No? When you say digitalization, Mr. President, it's an end-to-end process, meaning from the time you file, from the time you pay, from the time you get your confirmation documents, all of this should be done digitally, not printing out a form through digital means and then pay it through manual. No? So there's really a misconception, Mr. President, and I note that in one of the quote-unquote digital packages of BIR, there's what we call the e-BIR forms, no? Which is actually printing a form. No? So, Mr. President, I think some taxpayers would want that, but eventually that should be done away because the concept of digitalization is really everything is done digitally. No printing of forms, no manual going to a physical payment center or the RDO, but everything is done online.
Yeah, yes, maybe that happens with some of our taxpayers, but the other side, Mr. President, I was illustrating another practice. After they have filed it digitally, and then after they get the receipt digitally, they still need to print what form they filed digitally and then their official receipt digitally. They need to print to have it part of their records. So does the bill require that for the taxpayer to also still have an analog copy of what he did digitally?
Yeah, Mr. President, I think that is a brand under the e-BIR forms. That is being implemented right now. But Mr. President, in the bill, we didn't specify it in that detail. No? But in the introduction that I will be making later on, is we will be specifying what type of digitalization we want to happen, no? Which is an end-to-end digitalization, no? Not downloading of forms and then
Yeah, okay.
printing of forms. No?
Okay.
That's not the
Okay po
vision.
yun, okay po yun. Wag na yun. I think the people will understand that. They will do it digitally. Pero tapos natanggap na, stamped received digitally. But do they still need to keep paper copies of what they filed? Yun eh. And then even of the digital OR that they got from the BIR, they need to print. Kasi ganito sa Mr. President ang problema eh. I'm sure at the back of the mind of the taxpayer is, paano kung sabihin ng BIR wala sa record nila?
Yeah.
Kasi sa tunay na buhay, using paper, when you go to the BIR, sasabihin nila, produce what you filed before us. Magtataka ka eh. Ha? Pinail na namin sa inyo. And then you pass the burden to us to produce what we filed with you. Ngayon, paano kung sa digital world mangyari po yan? I mean, that's the problem.
That should not happen, Mr. President. Part of the digitalization is tracking, is accountability and tracking of transactions, Mr. President. So we didn't specify that level of detail in the bill, no? But definitely when you say digital method, there's no more printing of physical forms. Everything can be compared and audited through digital means, Mr. President. But of course, we will give our taxpayers that option to print. Some of our taxpayers really find comfort in the physical forms and physical documents. So there's an option, but internally, all of the documents that will be given to the taxpayer should be digitalized or should be digital and recognized by the BIR, Mr. President. So
I'm sure, Mr. President, those taxpayers who feel the need to print to be secure, to make sure that they have a printed copy, have had unpleasant experiences with the BIR.
Yeah.
Where yung sinabi ko nga,
I get your point, Mr. President.
na-file ko na po to sa inyo. Ganun ba? Pakita nyo sa amin yung pinail mo.
Yeah.
And they're supposed to be computerized.
But Mr.
Na,
President,
diba? At least in the filing, di ba? They supposed to be, dapat ma-search na nila yan.
yeah. Well, Mr. President, hindi naman pwedeng the BIR's vision is digitalization. Pero when it comes to audit, they will request for physical papers. No, I think it should be all digital also. No, later on, it might not happen instantly, but the concept there is everything should be
Yes.
done digitally.
I'm referring to experiences in this, the current system where
Yes,
we're
Mr.
still
President.
dealing with a lot of paper filing, etc.
Yeah.
Ganun na nangyayari.
Yeah.
So, I'm sure you takot na in the digital world, nakakatakot yun. If I did not print anything and then you will deny that you cannot find what I filed digitally, then
Yeah,
that's a big problem to for the taxpayer. So siguro
get your point.
the BIR should also magpakitang gilas in the meantime, Mr. President, bawas-bawasan na natin itong mga ganitong mga insidente that they claim na they cannot find the papers that that have been filed with them.
Yes, Mr. President.
Kung mawala po yung then sooner or later, magiging kampante na po tayo sa totally digital filing. And I believe large taxpayers are now
Yes.
as of the moment totally digital filing na po.
Yes, they're mandated to use the EFPS to file their returns and pay their taxes, Mr. President. So the big taxpayers, they have that capability. Obviously, they have more manpower. They have much more sophisticated equipment. They have access to the internet. So they're mandated now to file and pay in the digital method, Mr. President.
And then doesn't the bill also ultimately bring to the level of the medium enterprises the system which is being implemented for the large taxpayers? Ganun
Yes,
po?
Mr. President, that's the ultimate vision, Mr. President. In fact, that's the reason why in the bill, one of the salient features of the bill is to create a special office for, not special, but to create a dedicated office for MSMEs, Mr. President. Right now, we have a dedicated office for large taxpayers, attending to the requirements and also monitoring the fulfillment of taxes for the large taxpayers. But for the MSMEs, a special feature of the bill is to carve out a special office for them so that this office will attend to the needs of the MSMEs, Mr. President.
I thought the bill would impose on the medium scale enterprises the same system being imposed now for the large taxpayers. Kaya nag-aalala ako for them, baka hindi nila kakayanin because of the manpower requirement, the skills, etc.
Wala pa, Mr. President. It's not being imposed on the medium.
In the bill.
No,
if
it's
it
not.
becomes law, it's not.
It's not, Mr. President. It's not.
So,
So
but
it
the-
really depends on the capacity of our MSMEs, Mr. President. So admittedly that the capacity is quite dynamic, depending on technology, how fast they adopt. So we didn't specify in the bill, Mr. President.
So the second feature or objective of the bill is to focus on MSMEs. Can we be enlightened how MSMEs will be benefited from this particular bill, Mr. President?
Mr. President, there'll be the bill will authorize the commissioner and also the DOF secretary to create a special office for MSMEs, Mr. President, depending on their size, their income, their asset and other facets, Mr. President. And the reason for that, Mr. President, is we have a lot of MSMEs. No? Almost 90% of our taxpayers are MSMEs. And the aim of this office is to further simplify, further broaden the base of MSMEs, and improve on the compliance of MSMEs by simplifying the prerequisites for the MSMEs, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President. Pero how is it done, Mr. President? So that yung mga nakikinig sa atin na mga micro business owners, small business owners, will understand ano bang benepisyo nitong batas na ito para sa kanila.
Okay. Well, Mr. President, in the let me just on page 3, line 16 of the bill, the commissioner and the secretary is authorized to provide for a special unit to cater to the needs of the taxpayers, such as under such classification.
Each one for small, medium, at saka sir,
So only in those general terms, Mr. President? Yun lang ang ma-promise nitong panukalang ito na, ang mga MSMEs, do not worry, there will be a special unit for you. Yan lang po yun?
Kagaya na ngayon na masyadong lumilos na for large, kasi parang generalized po siya yung requirements as of now. So we're perfectly simplify po natin yung requirements, yung forms, for estimate, and then yes.
And then, but yung tinatanong niya is the special unit.
One for each class. What?
Oo nga, what will the special unit address?
Kaya nga, ano purpose na? Wala kang benefit.
Classify natin yung classes pertaining to the special classes.
Yeah.
So yun, different para.
Paano pa mga
Like what?
Paano
You want it?
Kasi nidak pala ito.
Iba kayo na meron na kasi for large tax payers. So yung mga large tax payers, because sila, tapos sila din po yung streamline ng requirements kung sila pag-use sa our office.
Okay, alright.
Yun po yung mangyayari. Kapatid lang po after.
Yeah, so, alright. Sorry for the delay, Mr. President. I was just getting some specific answers. Well, Mr. President, right now there's an office or a unit for large taxpayers. And under the current practice right now, this unit focuses on the requirements, the compliance issues related to large taxpayers, Mr. President. And consequently, after that, they also issue specific revenue regulation for that large taxpayers group. So what we are envisioning is to apply the same concept to MSMEs, Mr. President. So for example, concerns of MSMEs, simplification of compliance of MSMEs, releasing of very specific revenue regulations addressing specific concerns of MSMEs, Mr. President. So that is in a nutshell, the vision of creating that special unit, Mr. President.
Okay, so right now the taxpayers are the corporate taxpayers, no, are divided into large taxpayers and then non-large taxpayers. Ganun po ngayon. So
Yes, Mr. President.
under our bill, it will be large taxpayers and then special unit. Ganun ang mangyayari. But if you lump all together the MSMEs in one special unit, hindi ba, isn't that the same as the non-large taxpayer din?
Actually, Mr. President, we can further divide, for example, the medium-sized taxpayers, Mr. President. When we were studying the MSMEs, no, the medium-size actually can be separated on its own because of its capacity, because of its revenue, because of its asset size. So we authorize the commissioner and the secretary to further categorize. No? For example, depending on the situation, but they can come up with a special unit for medium-sized taxpayers. They can come up with a unit for small and micro taxpayers, depending on their analysis on what will be the most efficient, Mr. President.
So, Mr. President, we encounter again the mechanism of delegating some power to the Secretary of Finance. So we have to study this, whether or not this is another case of an undue delegation of legislative power. How come we cannot, Mr. President, in the bill itself, define what is a micro enterprise, what is a small enterprise, and what is a medium scale enterprise? Actually, there is already an MSME law. How come we are not even referring to it and seeking guidance on the definition of the MSME, Mr. President? And then ang option, ang ginawa natin sa bill, delegate it again now to the Secretary of Finance, Mr. President.
Actually, two things, Mr. President. There's no the sole definition for MSMEs, no, under the Magna Carta for MSMEs, the Barangay Micro Enterprises Law, and other issuances are all based on asset, Mr. President.
Asset,
no?
tama, asset.
They're all based on asset.
Right.
But obviously, for tax collecting purposes, it's not based on asset, it's based on revenue, Mr. President. So we allowed the commissioner and the secretary to come up with a categorization based on certain criteria. No? For example, asset, number of employees, revenue take, payment of VAT, payment of income tax. So he will come out, or that the secretary will come up with a categorization based on different criteria to come up with an MSME category for this purpose, Mr. President. And in terms of delegation, Mr. President, the large taxpayer unit can be created administratively, Mr. President. So we're not actually delegating any powers, but we're just authorizing the DOF secretary to create that special unit, subject to the criteria specified in the law, Mr. President. Actually, the only definition of MSME based on revenue is under create, Mr. President, no? Wherein the income taxes for corporation is divided, is segregated into two types, no? The 25% for the bigger taxpayers and the 20% for the I would say the smaller taxpayers, Mr. President.
So why didn't we make the decision, Mr. President, in the bill itself? How come we are, instead of making the decision whether to follow the MSME definition in the Magna Carta, whether to follow the MSME definition in the Create Law, we have chosen to delegate the decision-making to the Secretary of Finance again, Mr. President.
But Mr.
So
Pre-
why can we not? Why don't we want to make the decision ourselves and define what is a micro, what is the small, and what is the medium, and why are we even taking the time and the effort to categorize them? Because these are the benefits that will be due to them. I mean, I think that's the only purpose why we need to do this. Otherwise, kung general pare-pareho rin naman, we just segregate the large from the non-large, Mr. President.
Mr. President, when we were crafting this law and we analyzed MSMEs, there are different types of MSMEs. No? For example, a trading company will have a different financial profile compared to, let's say, a manufacturing company. No? So, for example, a trading company will have a bigger income but smaller margin, no, Mr. President. So, a manufacturing company will have a revenue but a bigger margin because a bigger expense, no, because it has employees, manufacturing, employees, electricity, and other things, so labor. So, because of the different financial profiles of MSMEs, it's very difficult. We had very difficult time to come up with a universal definition for MSMEs because of their different profiles, Mr. President. So we decided to give the secretary that authorization based on different criteria, so looking at, let's say, their VAT payments, looking at their income tax payments, and so on, Mr. President. So we gave that power, that flexibility, so that they can look at the entire different criteria, you know, to categorize MSMEs different.
So the purpose, Mr. President, is not actually to give them benefits, but so that they can be examined more minutely, or in more detail? That is the purpose. It's not about benefits to them?
No, it's about benefits, Mr. President.
Ano pa kaya? Ano po kaya? So if you are a micro, let us say under the definition delegated to the Secretary of Finance, this is a micro enterprise. What would the micro enterprises benefits be compared to the enterprise falling under small and under the delegated power of the Secretary of Finance to define what is small? Anong magiging diferensya po?
Well, Mr. President, the situation of these different MSME categories will be given special attention, Mr. President. Like, for example, revenue regulation geared towards micro industries, or revenue regulation geared towards small industries or small category, Mr. President. So those are what we envision that will happen after creating that special unit, Mr. President. Again, that was we observed that in the large taxpayer unit, wherein there's a special attention and specific regulation covering the large taxpayers, Mr. President. So the first step, Mr. President, is to categorize them. No? Categorize them. It can be MSME as one, it can be different. And then the second, Mr. President, is creating that unit to attend to the issues and the needs of those categories, Mr. President.
Yeah, but yung large taxpayers, ang nangyayari, you're put there so that you are subjected to detailed examination, Mr. President. May benepisyo ba sila dun? If that is, I hope that is not going to be the only purpose of this classification, Mr. President. And we are not even sure how they will be classified. At baka magkagulo-gulo lang, Mr. President. It will now be, they will be, you are classified as micro or small, not on the basis of the usual definition, but on the basis of revenue flow over one taxable year, Mr. President.
So, Mr. President,
Where did this idea come from, Mr. President? And what is the ultimate purpose, Mr. President?
well, Mr. President, let me just read in the law, Mr. President, the criteria that will be taken into consideration. For example, capacity, yes, page 2, line 24, capacity to comply with tax laws, rules, regulation, the amount and type of tax paid, gross sales of the taxpayers. It will also look at inflation, volume of business, wage and employment levels, and similar economic financial factors, Mr. President. So those are the things that the Secretary will look at, Mr. President. So the reason why we didn't, because when we were doing our research, all the definitions that we saw are all asset-based, Mr. President. So on top of those asset-based, the financial profiles of MSMEs are also different. No? Again, no, trading companies will have a different financial profile to, let's say, manufacturing companies, Mr. President. So, instead of putting it in the law, no, we gave that flexibility to the Secretary based on certain criteria, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President. So we encounter another delegation of power to the Secretary of Finance. We will subject this to
With the permission of the minority
with-
leader.
with the tests mentioned by our
Mr. President.
presiding officer, the tests on.
Actually, Mr. President, this can be created administratively already.
You know.
But then again, no, what we want is the bill to authorize and also to direct the Secretary to create this special unit, Mr. President. So, but administratively, they can create special units under their offices, Mr. President.
With the permission of the sponsor, Senator Tolentino is seeking the floor.
Yes, Mr. President, with the permission of the gentleman, they're not supposed to sit down, Mr. President, because I'll be
Perhaps, Mr. President, to answer the query of the minority leader, perhaps the purpose of the gentleman from Valenzuela is really to adopt the concept of flexibility and adaptability, giving enough powers, perhaps not just to the Secretary of Finance, but the Commissioner of Internal Revenue, to really adapt to evolving economic conditions, as well as perhaps court decisions that may impact tax regulation. So the grant of these broad powers to the secretary would allow enough room to enable him to implement and enforce changes accruing after the approval of this law. So there are factors that would have to be considered, Mr. President, and to limit the powers to Congress would probably be not suitable to the intent of the author here. And I totally agree that flexibility and adaptability, as well as responsiveness to the taxpayers' needs, likewise, not just to the needs of the state, the government, should be addressed. And I think it falls squarely within the parameters of the new measure being proposed by Senator Gatchalian.
Correct, Mr. President.
Just an input, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Tolentino.
Thank you for
Minority Leader.
that intervention, Senator Tolentino.
Thank you. We will take note of the ideas made by the only doctor in the House, Mr. President.
3 master's degree, Mr. President.
3 times a doctor, Mr. President. But at any rate, Mr. President, ito, tingnan mo to. I have found Section 8 of the bill, page 6, which amends Section 57 of the NIRC. We are now delegating to the Secretary of Finance the authority to determine the taxpayers who shall not be required to withhold taxes under subsection B of this section. Oh, hindi po ba ang duty to withhold taxes is imposed by law?
Well, Mr. President, this is aimed for the micro and small taxpayers, Mr. President, so that they will be free from the responsibilities of withholding taxes, because withholding takes a lot of accounting processes and recording, Mr. President. And most or even all of our small and micro businesses, Mr. President, are run by family members. So to free them from that complication of withholding taxes, we place that feature here, Mr. President.
Why are we not doing it directly, Mr. President? Bakit, ano pa? Bakit tutulay pa tayo sa Secretary of Finance? Hindi ko na maintindihan, Mr. President. We keep on delegating power to the Secretary of Finance. If that is our intention, I think we can capture it in words, Mr. President, and put it in the bill.
We're open to suggestion, Mr. President. We're very open to suggestion, Mr. President. But that is the intention. That is the essence
Yeah,
of
can-
this.
To simplify life, Mr. President, of lawmakers. If there is an intention, let us express it with words expressing categorically and literally the intention. Huwag na po tayong paliko-liko pa. Ipasa natin bola rito sa isa. Di sabihin mo, gawin mo yung gusto namin gawin. That's actually delegation of legislative power, Mr. President. Again, Mr. President.
Yeah. We're open to suggestion, Mr. President, and at the proper time, we can discuss possible improvements, Mr. President. But I get the point of the minority leader, Mr. President. But again, the intention here is to free the micro and the small businesses from withholding responsibilities.
Yes, Mr. President, and our sponsor was able to express the intention of this particular paragraph in one paragraph, and he captured everything. So it can be done, Mr. President. It can be done directly.
I will heed to the suggestion of our good minority leader, Mr. President.
Well, Mr. President, so yun po yun, ano, yeah, we are worried about the lack of definition of the micro, small, and medium. Then we delegate it to the Secretary of Finance. If we can do it ourselves, let us do it. And then, bakit, Mr. President, currently, ano po bang feedback from the BIR dun sa, kunyari, it is a small or medium scale enterprise using the MSME definition in the law based on assets, and then it is engaged in logistics, and then yung isa flow instead of assets, which is what we use to classify enterprises. In real life, sir, in real life, if only if there is some
Yeah.
information from the BIR. No?
But Mr. President, one complication of assets is it's not so, it doesn't fit when it comes to payment of income taxes and payment of VAT, Mr. President, because for example, trading companies will not have assets. Manufacturing companies will have assets. Logistic companies will have assets. So when we were discussing this bill, initially we wanted to adopt the definition in existing laws already on MSMEs. However, when we were debating this, it's difficult because assets will not be an accurate picture of the income capacity of the company, Mr. President, because of the financial profile is very different, Mr. President. So that's why we didn't use assets, but we decided to leave it to the Secretary to decide on what the definition is based on certain criteria and also financial profile, Mr. President. So that is the logic.
So in real life, Mr. President, so a medium-sized trading company and a medium-sized manufacturing company, because of financial structure, or which in the opinion of the BIR, in the opinion of the BIR, are we not able to collect the proper amount of taxes? Meron po ba? Meron po bang ganong theory?
No, but-
Because of the financial structure, we are not.
No, they can collect, Mr. President, but the classification using asset is not appropriate for revenue collection, Mr. President. So that is the dilemma when we encountered before.
Kaya, Mr. President, meaning to say, there is a theory or a thinking that we are not collecting the proper taxes from this from a trading company or a
No, Mr.
manufacturing
President,
company because of this
that's not what I meant, Mr. President. The collection is there, no? It's being undertaken right now, but the classification based on asset is not appropriate for tax purposes, Mr. President, because the existing classification under different laws, no? Like for example, under RA 9501.
Definition of,
What law?
9501. Yung Magna Carta.
Yeah. Under Magna Carta for MSMEs, it's based on assets and also number of employees, Mr. President. So we wanted to adopt this because it's an existing. But then again, no, the profile of companies is very different. No? Like I said, no, manufacturing companies will have a big asset base. So it's a different. It's not appropriate for tax collection, Mr. President.
How will this bill help tax collection, Mr. President? Given the given the specific companies that we are using, Mr. President, na asset-wise, pareho tabla silang medium sila, trading isa, manufacturing isa. So, and then we want them to be differently classified because asset is not appropriate to determine revenue generation.
For tax
So-
collection, Mr. President.
Yes, so what has been envisioned in the bill, Mr. President, how to remedy whatever is the problem, the problem I am not appreciating yet, Mr. President. What is the problem? But what will the bill do, Mr. President?
Insofar as the classification, no, Mr. President, so the bill aims to create a special unit, no, and classify MSMEs. No? And the objective there is to serve the needs of those MSMEs and eventually come up with regulations, maybe memorandums, that will help the MSMEs in the compliance of their tax obligations, as well as filing of other documents such as income tax return. So it's a unit dedicated to MSMEs, Mr. President.
Para tulungan.
Para tulungan sila,
Hindi
Mr.
para
President.
pigain.
No, para tulungan,
Para
Mr. President.
tulungan. Okay,
Oo.
Mr. President. Okay,
Para tulungan.
kung ganyan, magtulungan po tayo dyan. Okay? Kung paano sila tutulungan.
Yes, Mr. President.
Pero so what's wrong with tulungan sila on the basis of their
Asset
classification
size?
by assets? Mr. President, bakit kung gusto natin silang tulungan, bakit why are we making life so complicated, Mr. President, na we will even
I'll give you a very,
distort the accepted definitions of micro, medium, micro, small, and medium. Kasi when we encounter these terms, Mr. President, siyempre,
ito ba yun?
we will refer to the Magna Carta
Yeah.
for the MSMEs. Tapos pagdating dito sa bill na to, special ang meaning nila,
Meron ka ba?
Mr. President. And then the purpose is to help them.
Yeah.
Oh,
I'll give you a very specific example, Mr. President. Under RA 9501, the Magna Carta for MSMEs, a medium-sized company, no, is 15 million to 100 million. Okay,
Right.
that's a medium-sized company. Okay. A trading company,
15, tama, no,
15,
small, ano?
yeah, 15 to 100 million. Okay, regardless of the revenue. Okay, the 15 million to 100 million for a trading company might not qualify because of that. No? Because trading companies, normally they have small asset base. But in terms of revenue, they might be big. No? A manufacturing company will qualify, but their revenue might be smaller. So, Mr. President, for purposes of taxation, it's very hard to just rely solely on assets, because the businesses have different financial profiles, Mr. President. Again, no, trading companies, they have one desk, but they can generate billions in revenue. But a manufacturing company will have a billion assets, but they can generate the same revenue, Mr. President. And probably, Mr. President, the same net income, Mr. President. But if we use the definition under the Magna Carta, the medium-sized companies, the medium-sized companies will have different asset profile depending on their businesses, Mr. President. So that's the reason why we did not use this definition, Mr. President.
Yes, I know, Mr. President, but siguro if we use different terms, if we want to use the same terms with a different meaning, we might as well use different terms. But I still cannot appreciate what is the issue, Mr. President, we are trying to address, because magkikita-kita rin kayo to the same tax table, Mr. President, and then you pay the tax on the basis of the same tax bracket or tax table, Mr. President, or tax formula. So if the purpose is to help them, we can make life simpler, Mr. President, we can stick to the to the definition. At any rate, inaamin naman natin that this is not so that we can get more taxes from them. Inaamin natin na hindi yun ang purpose. But to help them.
Yeah.
So, they have the same starting point because on the basis of assets, they are medium or small on the basis of assets per the law. They generate different revenues. Siguro ano bang ratio yon? Revenue to asset ratio iba. But pagdating naman sa tax to be paid, they follow the same formula, Mr. President.
I'll reverse it, Mr. President. If we use, can we flash that? I saw it was flashed. So for example, we'll flash it now. For example, that medium-sized company there. A medium has an asset base of 15 to 100 million. No? If I have a trading company, no, and I only have a small office, no, and my asset is just 3 million, no, I will be put in a micro category because I'm only a trading company. I only have a few, but my sales can be 1 billion or even more. So in using the asset base as a category will not reflect the true business activity of that business. And the category might end up wrong, no, or inaccurate, Mr. President, because the trading company, which is generating 1 billion in sales, but only has 3 million in assets, will fall under a micro category.
But is that micro or small corporation able to avoid or evade paying the correct taxes?
No, Mr. President. Di naman, Mr.
The
President.
issue, Mr. President, I don't, because it is in reality, sa example, not more than 3 million, it is really a micro enterprise.
But the sales,
then-
Mr. President, can be
Yes, and then
can be billions, Mr. President. So
And-
it's not
and
a
then
micro
tax-
in terms of sales.
correct, because we don't have any definition na micro based on sale.
Yes.
Is
Only
that micro enterprise paying the correct taxes due from all of its transactions? Sila yung tanong eh.
Yes, Mr. President. Yeah. The assumption
What's
is
the point?
hopefully
Why do we need to confuse things,
Actually, Mr. President, it's only in the classification, Mr. President, of micro, small, and medium, Mr. President.
Can we not follow what is the already accepted definition, Mr. President? Ang pagkaintindi ko kasi, Mr. President, we will help the micro and the small. Parang ganon.
Yes.
We will relax some of the regulations or requirements that are required from the medium and to the large. We will relax them as far as the micro and the small are concerned. So our concern is we do not want a micro which has sales of billions to benefit from that policy, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President.
Why, Mr. President? It's still a micro. Abilidad na lang nila yung 1 billion. Pero
Because
I doubt if that really happens. Pero that is the example that we have. Pero
Yeah, that
we are
is-
using the example. But if should that happen, is that micro paying correct taxes? If yes, then since it is micro, let it benefit from the micro-friendly policies, Mr. President.
Well, Mr. President, because what we envision is the categorization or the classification will end up into very specific revenue regulation and other documentary issuance specific for that business, Mr. President. So when the asset categorization in our analysis will not fit the revenue or the taxation purposes of the bill, Mr. President, because it's based on asset. No? So, for example, a hard example there will be, a business. For example, a parlor, Mr. President, will have an asset of 3 million. No, it's considered a micro business. But a trading company, which will have only one desk or one small office, will also fall into a micro, but it can also be generating 1 billion or even more revenue, Mr. President. So it's not the same in that sense, Mr. President. So it cannot be put in the same category, Mr. President.
So we are after the revenue, Mr. President. So yun na nga. I mean,
Yes, of course,
Talagang
Mr. President.
nakatingin tayo sa revenue, and we are doubting if we are getting the correct taxes from that micro, which generates billions in revenue. So we
But
will
Mr.
put it in another category so that it's the scrutiny, the level of examination would be different from the other micros. Ganun yata ang gusto natin. So lumalabas po sa akin, my impression is this is not really to help them, but to really
But
go after their revenue flow, Mr. President. So,
Mr. President, to help them to help them in a sense that to help them in compliance, to help them in their documentation, and the end goal is to improve revenue take, Mr. President.
Mr. President, hindi pala imposible yung sinasabi mo na may micro na billion ang sales.
Pwede, Mr. President.
Si Parmali, ilan ba ang kanyang
Oo, Mr. President.
650,000. Ngayon ko lang naalala, 650,000
Si Farmally,
pesos.
Mr. President, if the
Assets.
equity of Farmally,
assets.
if the asset of Farmally is 600,000,
650,000, yeah.
that will fall under micro.
Yeah, micro. Oh.
But
But
the asset of the sales of Farmally is how much?
A billion.
8.9
8
billion
billion,
yata yung
Mr. President.
ka-revenue flow niya
Yeah.
as action. But the point is yun nga, ma-capture dapat yung taxes due doon sa kanya. So, at any rate, Mr. President, kung makita mo, Farmally, kung i-chart mo siguro yun, nakita mo nakachamba lang eh. Bumalik siya sa micro, definitely, Mr.
Kasi
President.
dahil nahuli siya, Mr. President. Pag hindi siya mahuli, tuloy-tuloy yun.
With the indulgence of the minority leader, Senator Pia Cayetano seeking the floor.
Mr. President, it is a difficult topic and I'm trying to listen as I also prepare for the next interpellation. So nag-jumble-jumble na din siya sa akin. But I just have a point of information to be sure that the younger generation can understand the two gentlemen. Hindi na parlor tawag ngayon, salon.
Talon.
Yun lang po ang aking
Shows our
point
age,
of
Mr. President.
information. Parlor din kasi tawag ko, lagi ako nakokorek eh. So sinasabi ko na rin para naintindihan. Bakit it's a very good example.
Parang hindi na ho disco ngayon. Club na.
Yun lang.
Buti alam pa ng sponsor natin, Mr. President. So, Mr. President, siguro,
But I get the point of the good minority leader, Mr. President. I see your chain of thought, Mr. President. I'll give it some more analysis and consult with the minority leader on how to move forward, Mr. President.
Oo nga. And then, Mr. President, we also noticed that the bill mentions the accounting method ba tawag yan? The accounting method. Are we making the accrual method of accounting mandatory
Yes, Mr. President.
for all?
For both goods and services, Mr. President.
Yes.
For goods now, it's accrual, Mr.
For
President.
goods, it's now.
Yes,
But-
yes, it's accrual. So for services, only, Mr. President.
So okay, so napapractice na pala ngayon ang accrual method for the goods.
Yeah, for goods.
Wala
Mr.
namang
President.
reklamo ang ating mga businesses or hindi sila makareklamo. No choice.
Wala naman, Mr. President. So, so far naman, the normal reklamo that BIR is attending to. But that has been the practice, Mr. President, since kailan yung approval?
So for the
2000. EO yan, di ba?
for the transactions not covered by the mandatory accrual accounting method, what is the current system now? The taxpayer chooses on how he or she reports the tax, accrual or cash?
Yeah. To simplify things, Mr. President, for income tax, it's all accrual, Mr. President. For VAT, goods are reported based on accrual basis. For services, is based on cash basis, Mr. President.
Okay, so but we are going to change that in the bill, Mr. President.
Yes, we will standardize. So everything will be based on accrual basis. So meaning the reporting of VAT will be in sync with the reporting of income taxes, Mr. President, because income taxes, regardless whether you're selling goods or services, is based on accrual. So if you're a service business, you're actually using two methods. For VAT, it's cash, and for income tax, it's accrual, Mr. President.
So, and that leads to what kinds of issues or problems, Mr. President? From the experience of BIR, ano yun?
For the accrual basis?
Yes, a business with accrual as far as income tax, and then cash basis on VAT payment. So it leads to what? Confusion with the BIR?
Typically, it's confusion, Mr. President, because the VAT, the base is different. No? For example, when they report their income tax, it's the reports that they're using is based on the accrual method, meaning based on sales. But when they report their VAT, it's based on cash basis, so it's based on the receipts, Mr. President. So that there are two documents that you are, if you are a service business, you have two documents that you are reporting, Mr. President, as opposed to goods. When you're goods, there's only one, no? Because for VAT and also for income tax, it's the same accrual method, Mr. President. So there are some, based on my conversation with practitioners, sometimes it leads to confusion. It leads to confusion both on the side of the tax administrator as well as the taxpayer, Mr. President. And those confusions sometimes leads to more documents and, of course,
And what else,
the
Mr.
things.
President? What else, because of that, can taxes be avoided because of that, Mr. President?
It
And
can be
then-
delayed.
and
It can be
avoided
delayed.
and then remain undetected by the BIR?
It can be delayed, Mr. President.
Delayed, but ultimately paid.
Ultimately paid, Mr. President, but you have to also take note that cash flows for government is very important. No? We need to collect not only accurate taxes, but timely taxes, because we pay government employees, we pay government suppliers. So it's important that government receives timely payment of taxes. So there are issues, no? For example, transfer pricing, no? Because you can control the time when you will pay your supplier. And if your supplier is one and the same or the same corporate entity, you can actually delay the payment of your VAT. If you delay the payment of your VAT, government cash flows will also be delayed.
Pwede ka rin mag-condone.
Sir, yung self-dealing na ano? Ang mga parang
Sa transfer
ito
price.
timing mo para sa yung bracket, bagsak sa bracket.
Yeah. Ganun. Nangyari pala.
Like, parent
Mr. President, okay, so if that's actually a good example, and it opened my eyes na posibleng, but that's not tax, I don't know, that is not tax evasion, no? That is tax
Avoidance,
avoidance,
Mr.
proper
President.
timing. Okay. So we want to plug this loophole.
Actually, Mr. President, when we were discussing this, I came to appreciate that government cash flow is equally as important as mandating the collection of tax or mandating our taxpayer to pay their taxes. Meaning, it's not only the accurate payment but also the timely payment, because as you know very well, government has obligations, no? And government needs to function on a daily basis. So it needs to collect taxes on a timely basis so it can function efficiently. We have to pay electricity, we have to pay salaries.
Meron po bang nag-register ng concern or objection against the plan to make the accrual method of accounting mandatory for VAT payments?
Yes, Mr. President. Some stakeholders sent us their position paper
Again?
expressing their concern. And based on our analysis, Mr. President, expressing their concern, and based on our analysis, Mr. President, the concerns stem from the VAT payments. No? So we corrected that in the law. Anong page siya? By coming up with a provision on bad debts, Mr. President. On bad debts.
Yun na nga, yung kasi pagkaintindi ko, Mr. President, sa accrual, once may transaction na, hindi pa nagbabayaran, i-declare mo na as if good na yung transaction, right? And all the tax implications of the transaction, you have to already to be liable for and to pay.
Correct, Mr.
Right,
President.
and then let us say
For-
hindi na tuloy sa bayaran, sa actual bayaran, it did a reversal, the taxpayer was paid the tax based on the accrual. We'll have to find a way to get a refund approved to the BIR muna na he overpaid, he or she overpaid. Ganun. So how is our refund system, Mr.
For
President?
goods, Mr. President, and income tax, that's the process right now, Mr. President.
Any problems encountered by the BIR on taxpayers requesting for refunds, credit, ano bang proper term po dyan? I-tax credit or i-tax refund?
But normally, for goods, refund yan, ano? For goods,
Pero I'm sure meron ano yan, no? May overpaid ka kasi na bad debt.
reduction on sales. So sa services, for
Tax credit.
yeah. So the same, Mr. President, it's being done with goods, Mr. President.
So
So
experience, Mr. President. With
it's a normal process, Mr. President, and I was told that by the BIR that they can adjust their sales figures so that VAT payments can be lowered down. They can also apply for credit, Mr. President. So they can apply the excess VAT as credit, Mr. President. So it's the same process as what we are doing now for sales of goods, Mr. President. So the same principle applies also for services, Mr.
Never a refund, Mr. President. Never. Tax credit lang at saka adjust your
Credit lang.
declaration to lower the tax.
Yeah, I was
Never
informed,
a
Mr.
refund.
I was informed, Mr. President, it's refund, credit, Mr.
Credit,
President.
tax
It's,
credit.
it's being done through credits, Mr. President. Especially if it's an ongoing concern, Mr. President, you have income taxes to pay, you have other taxes to pay, so you can use the credit to pay all of those taxes, Mr. President.
So ano reklamo dun sa ano?
Actually, kasi
Yeah. Yeah.
But I'm sure there are special cases, Mr. President, siguro, where the BIR makes an actual cash refund just in case, kunyari, going out of business na, pasaran na, gano'n. Kasi in-assume lang natin tax credit because useful pa sa negosyo because it's an ongoing business. But maybe in a rare or a special case, tama ba yan? Can the BIR give an actual cash refund based on an overpayment of tax claim?
Yeah. Yeah. Mr. President, one of the recommendations of our stakeholders is a refund upon cessation of business, Mr. President. So in the present system, when your business ceases to operate, there's no way to refund. No, there's no way to refund. No, so if you have excess input VAT, there's no way to take it. So in the bill, it was suggested that to include the provision that they can refund the excess input VAT, Mr. President,
Excess.
or the excess credit for that matter, Mr. President.
Excess
wala.
excess na bayad. Bayad.
Oo nga. Yeah.
And then, hindi ko ma-apply. Okay, thank you for that input, Mr. President. Pero hindi ba tayong mga consumers, we always have excess VAT payments because we don't claim the VAT payments.
If you're VAT registered, Mr. President.
Tayo, when we buy products, we pay VAT. We
Yeah.
do not claim the VAT.
Yeah, but we're not VAT registered, Mr. President, as consumers.
Kaya nga.
Yeah,
precisely.
but if you're a business and you're VAT registered, then you can claim the input VAT, Mr. President.
Yeah. So in the example or the answer given by the sponsor, that entity going or business concern closing down the business which has
Yeah, losing down.
paid VAT ba siya? Yeah. Paid VAT more than his the VAT payments made to it can claim as a cash refund the excess. Is that the answer of the,
Yes.
if I correct
Yeah.
understand it correctly, Mr. President?
Yeah. Yes, Mr. President, under Section 20, letter B, we included there, apply line 17, no? Apply for refund for any unused input tax, Mr. President. So we allow that in the bill, Mr. President.
Saan daw? Anong line, ano?
Page 19,
Page 19.
line 17.
Page 19, line 17. Oh, so that would be a specific benefit, Mr. President, which we can point to.
Yes, Mr. President.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
this is a new idea.
Yes, Mr. President. It actually came from the technical working group, if I'm not mistaken, from the Joint Foreign Chambers, because some of the foreign companies who come here and decided to go back, obviously they cannot use the credit anymore because they're back there. So what they requested is for them to refund the actual cash. So it actually came from the Joint Foreign Chambers group. I think it's the experience of foreign companies.
It's good that you
Moving out of
mentioned
the
that,
companies.
Mr. President, kasi yun, very specific benefit yun eh,
Yeah.
in the bill. Ngayon, Mr. President, we have also noticed that, what is this about the VAT invoice, an invoice replacing an official receipt? Mr.
Yes.
President, can we be clarified? What's the difference between an invoice and official receipt, and why will it be more beneficial for, if not for the BIR, but for the taxpayer to be using this invoice system, Mr. President?
But Mr. President, the invoice is being used, sales invoice being used for sale of goods. And then official receipt is being used for services, Mr.
Ano
President.
diferensya, Mr. President?
Actually, it's only the terminology is
Right.
different, Mr.
Precisely.
President, but the document is the same.
Precisely,
Yeah,
that's
but that's
it.
to distinguish if you're selling services and if you're selling goods. But the document, I had the same question, Mr. President, but it's the same, Mr. President.
The same rules, right? Sales invoice is must be printed by an official printer and registered with the BIR. So, and ano ba ang tawag mo doon? Mark pa? Ganun po ba yan?
Yes, Mr. President.
So what would be the
That's why since
what's the change here, Mr. President, in
But,
the bill?
Mr. President, since we are adopting the accrual method for the sales of services, we also aligned already the sales of services to the document that will be issued for to the sale of goods. So meaning we made it the same. So there will be no more distinction because the methods are the same anyways. So if you acquire services, you will be issued sales invoice instead of official receipt because the method is the same anyways. No? So we just aligned it so that there's no more confusion, Mr. President. In fact,
Why not use official receipt, Mr. President? Bakit invoice? Tapos, from the experience of the BIR, okay, from the rules of the BIR, ang aking feedback is parang mas loose tayo or lenient tayo pagdating sa invoice at mas marami yatang fraud or scams or corrupt practices involving in fake invoices. Mas pinifake yata yan kaysa official receipts. Is that correct, Mr. President?
You can pick any,
parang
Yes, you can.
same.
at sabi nila say maraming
Exactly
fraud.
the same?
Uh,
Exactly the same now?
I think the experience is both
Both.
have the same issues, Mr. President.
Why are we abandoning the term official receipt, Mr. President? Hindi ba mas tama yun when there is a transaction? Di ba may law, may separate law yata yun? Above 100 pesos, you have to now issue an official receipt. That is,
Yeah,
I think,
in the NIRC,
that is,
Mr.
I
President.
think, a law.
But the simple explanation, Mr. President, since we are adopting the method being used for goods to services, we're also adopting the document that is being issued for goods to services, Mr. President. So, so it will be harmonious. It will be the same for both goods and services, Mr. President. And apparently, I read in the position paper of the Joint Foreign Chambers, apparently we're the only country that distinguishes for the sale of goods and for the sale of services, apparently. In all jurisdictions, they issued only one document, which is official invoice, Mr. President, or whatever they call it. Or whatever they call it in their jurisdiction, Mr. President. But it's the same document for both, both kinds of transactions.
Will there be a resistance if we use official receipt?
Ang papalitan natin yung judge to file. Kasi i-invoice mo yun sa bilang.
Invoicing, no? Sa create yun, di ba? Sa create, no?
Yung system kasi sir na pinaperfect ng bilang.
Ano? Bili na sila. Oo nga, ganun nga. Sisaka na, ayun na natin, next part na lang. Tapos, ano yung mga documents?
Mr. President, right now, I was at train, no? Train. It's mandated in the train law that eventually everything will be electronic. So the BIR, I understand, is in the process of moving big taxpayers to what they call e-invoice, Mr. President. So
I-invoice talaga.
yeah, so going by that change and going by the adoption of the accrual method to services, so the theory there is for that term invoice to be adopted to services, Mr. President. But I see your point that it's a terminology that can be.
That is it. The invoice is the official receipt. Okay.
Yes, yes.
And should there be some old law or older law using the term official receipt, that now refers to invoice.
Actually, we'll be amending it in this law, Mr. President.
Baka meron kasi
The old one, yeah,
baka
pwede.
may mga older laws
Yeah,
natin na
pwede.
may official receipt na phrase doon.
Pwede.
That would be complied with
Yeah.
by the invoice.
Yeah.
The document we're referring to as invoice.
Yeah.
Okay.
But you're correct, Mr. President. It's a terminology, no? So it can be changed or used interchangeably, Mr.
Kayong
President.
mga bata, invoice. Kami, sa time
Ako
na
rin,
official
receipt,
receipt po kami.
Oo.
Opo. Kami
Actually,
yung
ako rin,
mga gamit ng
President.
parlor o arang in-expect namin. Kayo, salon, invoice. Okay. Yan po yung difference ngayon sa... So at any rate, Mr. President, siguro Mr. President, maybe if the sponsor can brief this representation and others who may be interested, especially on the classification of the MSME and why we need it and why we delegate it, Mr. President. And then if we could just suspend this interpellation for a while and then we will resume, maybe, maybe when we resume, we can now go to the specific wording of the measure, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. We will study that, Mr. President. I see the point of the good minority leader on that classification, and we'll give it another look on how to improve on that specific provision, Mr. President.
So, thank you, Mr.
Thank you, minority leader.
Ano ba, isa, generation ka pa?
Saan galing? Saan galing?
Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 2224 under Committee Report number 70. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved.
President, I move for a minute suspension.
Session suspended.
Mr. President, at this juncture, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 1846 under Committee Report number 22. This is the Bill on Internet Transactions Act of 2022. I so move, Mr. President.
Is there an objection? There being none, resumption of consideration of Senate Bill number 1846 under Committee Report number 22 is now in order.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, the parliamentary status of the measure is that we are in the period of interpellation. I now move to resume the period of interpellation and recognize the sponsor, the chairperson of the Committee on the Trade, Senator Mark Villar, and to interpellate Senator Pia Cayetana. So move, Mr. President.
Hearing the objection, period of interpellation is now in order. Senators Mark Villar and Senator Pia Cayetana are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. With the permission of our sponsor, before I proceed with the permission of the sponsor, I'd just like to confirm that we are in the period of interpolation, correct? That's what okay. And do I also understand correctly, Mr. Sponsor? I'm not yet interpolating, no, procedurally muna, that there is a substitute bill that was filed today.
Yes, it was filed, but not yet manifested.
Majority Leader.
The interpellation would be based still, Mr. President, on the original committee report because we have not yet introduced the substitute. If there is a substitute bill, Mr. President, that was already been filed. Is there? There is, yes, Mr. President.
Yes, okay.
So the basis, I would say, Mr. President, procedurally will be based on the original committee report, Mr. President.
But that, I believe, Your Honor, and that's the reason I'm raising it now, would require that we study two reports. I began studying the committee report, and then I cut midway and shifted, with due respect to the sponsor, to also do my part in supporting. So nag-shift ako dun sa pangalawa, pero I know that it has not been presented on the floor yet. So,
Mr. President, thank you with the indulgence of our dear colleagues. I totally agree with the observation of our one of the most senior member of this August chamber. May I ask for a minute suspension, Mr. President?
Session suspended.
Thank you.
and then
issue.
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. President, at this juncture and with the permission of the body, I move that we close the period of interpellation to allow the
open-
sponsor to introduce
to
the
open the period of
amendments in the nature of a substitute bill. I so move,
Yes.
Mr. President.
And open the period of amendment.
Yes, Mr. President.
There be no objection to the motion. Motion is approved.
Mr. President, may I move that we recognize the sponsor, Senator Mark Villar.
Thank you, Majority Floor Leader. Thank you, Mr. President. In accordance with Rule 29, Section 82, Paragraph 2 of the Rules of the Senate, and with the consent of the body, I move that we amend the bill in the nature of a substitute by striking out all the text after the enacting clause and inserting the language or text contained in the substitute bill dated August 2, 2023, with a copy thereof filed with our bills and index service and distributed to the members earlier today. I so move, Mr. President.
There be no objection to the motion, Majority Leader. There's a motion.
Yes,
It's,
Mr. President.
Supported by the Majority Leader. The motion is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. At this juncture, may I move that we open the period of interpellations, Mr. President?
Yes, to go back to we move to go back to the period of
Of
interpellation
interpellations,
to
this
discuss
time to discuss the
the
substitute bill,
substitute
Mr. President.
bill.
And to recognize the sponsor himself, Senator Mark Villar, and to interpellate Senator Pia Cayetano. So,
There be
Mr.
no
President.
objection. Motion is approved.
Mr. President,
Yes, Senator Cayetano.
this is not an objection, but I believe this should not be a precedent because this bill is 31 pages. And humility aside, I am just being magnanimous in continuing my interpellation, even though this 31-page document, I just saw it today. So this
Okay.
is me being one with the team, taking one for the team, shifting what I studied in the first bill and moving to the next bill. But it should not be a precedent, Your Honor, because this is a complex bill. This is not a two-page bill, Your Honor. So I need the assurance of perhaps the Majority Floor Leader that this won't be a precedent. This will be very difficult for our other colleagues. Nag-effort lang talaga ako, Mr. President.
Although by, Senator Pia Cayetano, although by tradition, we have in the past accepted the bills by substitution. And then we discuss the substitute
Yes.
bill.
No, Mr. President, I have no problem shifting to the substitute bill. I'm saying the precedent I don't want to happen is that on the spot,
To give.
I am
Yes.
continuing my interpellation. Normally, you're given time to now study this new 30. This is a new animal, Mr.
Yeah, I understand,
President. This
Mr.
is a new
President.
document.
Yes.
A comma, a word, an or, and an and.
Ask for a
that's been
minute
filled.
suspension, Mr. President,
Yeah.
if I may.
No,
Mr.
yeah,
President.
no, we understand the point of
Yeah.
Lady Senator, and actually we can suspend consideration and.
Your Honors, I am willing to continue. I just want the commitment that
Yeah.
this is not a precedent.
Yes, Mr. President.
Nag-aral naman ako
True, Mr.
habang
President.
while there was something else going on earlier. So I am
And,
prepared.
and that's the reason, Mr. President, distinguished colleague from the city of Taguig and Pateros, that this representation asked that we suspend consideration, considering that I was also told today that the substitute bill was filed. So, Mr. President, it's an honest mistake and that we are not even aware about it. And now we are doing our best to continue with the deliberation of the measure. And we appreciate the gesture of being a team player of our distinguished colleague.
And to be honest, Mr. Majority Leader and Madam Senator, we are at your pleasure. If you want to do this on Monday, we can do this on Monday.
No,
It's all right.
Mr. President,
But if you want to continue, we can.
I am okay to continue. I just wanted to put on record that let's not make it a precedent so
Yeah.
that
Yes.
a case to case, like in this case, I am willing. I
Thank you.
am available. I am willing. Thank you.
Thank you very much to our distinguished colleague from Taguig and Pateros. So please proceed to the distinguished sponsor and the distinguished lady senator.
Oo naman. Pa-birthday daw, Your Honor.
Can I move for suspension, please, Your Honor?
Session suspended.
Ready? Are we, Mr. President, with the
Yes.
permission of the sponsor, may I start my
Yes, please
interpellation?
proceed, Madam.
Yes, please proceed.
Thank you.
Mr.
So,
President.
just to be clear, Your Honors, the very initial part of the of my interpellation, I am going line by line. I actually, as I said, started my review with the original committee report. So, Your Honor can feel free to correct me if there has been a change in the wording, as I will be basing, like, I will now be asking question about the declaration of policies, and that's based on the original committee report. Later on, I had the chance to shift to the substitute bill, but my first few questions will be based on the text of the committee report, if I may proceed, Your Honors.
Yes, please. Yes, please proceed, Your Honor.
Okay, so I will proceed. So the declaration of policy states that it is the policy of the state to promote and maintain a robust electronic commerce, e-commerce environment in the country by building trust between online merchants and consumers. That's just me reading it. It goes on to say the state recognizes the value and potential of the digital economy to increase competition and improve productivity. So my first question, Your Honor, is can the sponsor tell us with this kind of declaration of policy to improve productivity, can His Honor tell us how does the Philippines fare in terms of digital productivity compared to other countries or even compared to our ASEAN neighbors?
Yes, we have statistics here on the in terms of our e-commerce, and we can see that we fall behind our regional peers despite retail e-commerce sales growth rate. So we have some numbers here, and we can furnish you, excuse me, with this. In
Okay.
terms of internet penetration, we're at 74.2%, and that's one of the lower numbers in Asia. Also, cross-border percent of total sales at 24. E-commerce revenue in US dollars is 7.5 billion. Yes, and also online percent of total retail is only at 2%. So these are just some numbers about, and
Okay.
in comparison with other countries where
It's
we
low.
see it's in Malaysia you have 10% online retail percentage. In Thailand you have 8%.
Sorry, I'm trying to follow. What was it in the
In
other
sorry,
countries?
just to cite some examples of some other countries. In Malaysia you have 10%.
For what? For
For
what item?
online percent of total retail.
Okay, so
Yes.
2% versus 10%,
Yes,
no, for
and-
Malaysia, okay?
Yes, and for instance, in the same category, online percent of total retail, Thailand is at 8%.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do I understand this correctly, and also for the benefit of those who follow our deliberations? This figure that you're mentioning is online percent of total retail. So in the Philippines, 2% of total retail is 2% total retail. For total retail, 2% is online, and that means 98% is brick and mortar. Ganun ba yun? Do I understand that correctly?
Is it all brick and mortar outside?
And
And the rest is brick and mortar.
So is that other
Well, it's not online. So more if that's how we define brick and mortar, more or less, I think most retail is really brick and mortar if it's not online. So yeah.
Sorry, I didn't.
To answer, yes. Yes.
Okay. So in other words, in Malaysia, 10% is 10% of their total retail is online and 90% is brick and mortar.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, I'm just trying to understand. Is there anything else His Honor wanted to share on this?
No.
What does internet penetration mean?
Number of people who
Use.
utilize the internet. Yeah.
Use, not necessarily for online purchases, just use. It could be research, it could be Facebook.
No, ito nga. It's just usage. When you talk about e-commerce, that's different.
Okay, so just total
perspective.
usage.
Yeah, just total
Okay.
usage.
Kasi I thought parang isa tayo sa mga Facebook capital of the world. So, mababa ba yung 74? Is that, or that
It's
one is high?
Hindi, medyo, but not by a lot. I mean, just to give, and again,
Yes.
for internet penetration, just so we have a context. Sa Malaysia, 82.3%, sa Thailand, 79%, sa Vietnam, 77%. So,
Okay.
hindi naman malayo,
Yes.
but,
I think that's I thank His Honor for explaining this, because I think these numbers can show us a few things, no? Mababa talaga tayo dun sa percent of online to total retail when you compare it to at least the two other countries that His Honor mentioned. But in terms of internet penetration, it's not that low. In other words, gumagamit naman ng internet, pero baka Facebook lang lahat, 'di ba? Not so much for the online sales. So that's where that I would assume that's the basis for saying, for the declaration of policy, that the goal is to improve productivity. Kasi we will now give access to people who are selling their goods normally brick and mortar, sa tabi-tabi, sari-sari, sa palengke, in their own homes, well, not homes, but wherever they can reach customers. We're now saying that let's do it digitally. Let's help them become more productive digitally. Is that correct?
yes, that is correct. As you can see, when, according to the numbers, internet penetration is not that much higher than in other countries. I mean, the other countries are not that much higher than the Philippines. But if you see what we mentioned earlier, online of total retail, online percent of total retail, medyo malayo. So that is correct. The people are using, but they're not using it for e-commerce. Hence the need to maximize our potential for e-commerce in our country.
Okay, thank you, Your Honor. And then I will just read some other important phrases here in the declaration of policy, which I will tie up later on when I ask questions on the other provisions. So anyway, the declaration of policy goes on to say, to achieve these goals, thus the need to establish secure and reliable e-commerce platforms with appropriate transparency and utmost efficiency to encourage the creation of new products, services, business models, and processes. I'm fine with that, Your Honor. I would just like to tie this up later on to ensure that the policies we are now recommending by virtue of this bill will be consistent to the declaration of policies. I'll do that as we go along, Your Honor. But here, again, there is a provision at the end of this paragraph that says, okay, it's a long paragraph, but let me just read it very fast, and then I'll slow down in the part that I would like to discuss. Towards these ends, the state shall ensure effective regulation of commercial activities through the internet or electronic means to ensure that consumer rights and data privacy are protected, innovation is encouraged. Ito na po yung importante for me. Fair advertising practices and competition are promoted. So, fair advertising practice and competition are promoted. Online transactions are secure, intellectual property rights are respected, and so on and so forth. Last point, where product standard and safety are observed. I have a couple of questions specific to the last few lines. When we talk about advertising practices, does this include accuracy of claims being made? Dito ba pasok yon, yung parang truth in advertising?
Yes, of course, yes.
That
That
ganyan,
includes the
okay.
truth in advertising.
So
yes.
again, later on, I will look for the provisions to ensure that we can really make this a reality. Itong truth in advertising, itong fair advertising practices, no? Because I like His Honor recognizes, yan yung objective niyan. And this is just a statement without the very specific provisions that will give life to this statement. Wala naman tayong mahahabol sa kanila, no? So I will look for those provisions. I will ask His Honor for assistance later on to look for those provisions. On that note also, paano kaya yung, aside from yung just truth in advertising, but yung parang science, parang claims that are based on science? Because I also, my go-to social media platform is Instagram, and I follow influencers who have strong academic credentials in the areas that they're speaking of, no? So I wouldn't ask a nutritionist how to run their car or how to build a skyscraper, but I would listen to somebody with a master's or a PhD in nutrition or health when it comes to nutrition products. So kasama ba sa objective din natin, and His Honor can answer it now, or we can wait for the proper time when I get to those detailed provisions, yung who will determine kung accurate yung statements nila, or will that be part? I know there's a provision on
The e-commerce bureau.
I don't think I don't think it falls under the resolution of yung resolution of dispute resolution, because it may just be a consumer another consumer who'll say parang mali naman yung kiniklaim niya. And can we show it now? I have videos, I have photos. So like, for example, and His Honor knows, our colleagues know, I have been very vocal about my concern with the proliferation of vape products that are targeting kids. Well, guess what, colleagues? Now, there's vape products with glutathione in it, and collagen, and nashock talaga ako may ganyan na pala. Vape with glutathione and collagen. Mr. President, tingnan mo naman,
Dapat,
it's not...
Dapat itanong natin kay Senator Cheese yan. Baka may alam sa...
Mr. President, I will move on. Vape with glutathione and collagen. So first of all, I know that there are health experts who would even say that glutathione is FDA approved for certain uses. You cannot use that product for another purpose. And again, I don't even know what use it's FDA approved for, but even the form in which it will be used, so it's a pill, it's a lotion, injectable, whatever. I don't even know which one is approved, but I'm certain there is no vape approved. And it is here. So, yan yung tanong ko. Litong-lito na nga ako Binebenta ba to para masarapan ka dun sa ini-inhale mo, para pumayat ka, para pumuti ka, hindi ko na alam what it's for, Your Honors.
Yes. Thank you, Your Honor, for that question. In Section 18, with regards to the obligations of the online sellers, it's clearly stated, and I think this is one of the reasons why we need the bill. Precisely why we need the bill is to give teeth to our Department of Trade and Industry and the E-commerce Bureau. It's clearly identified in the bill that in Section 18 to clearly identify any promotional offer, any discount.
18 letter what?
Sorry, Section 18A,
A.
3. Yeah.
Okay.
Clearly identify any promotional offer, including any discount, premium, or gift. Ensure that any condition which was seen met to qualify for it is easily accessible, presented clear. Sales and promotional offers shall have the necessary permit as applicable with the appropriate government agencies. So aside from that, all the merchants online will also be required to register. So, not as of now, not all of them are required to register the address, information, and I think that's something very relevant. Now, in addition to that, should there be any infraction committed by the seller, the DTI has the power to take down the site or the website that is selling these products. So I think that's very important to give in cases like this, where, for instance, well, I don't want to make any judgment on those products, but
I think we can judge, Your Honor.
well, okay, yeah.
Your Honor's being very kind, but I think we
Yes.
can judge.
But should there be any products that are deemed as are found by the DTI to be in some way that do not conform to the requirements as set forth by the law, they can be taken down immediately by the DTI. So that power is something enshrined in the law.
Thank you, Your Honor. I appreciate the explanation. However, I would like to point out that the section His Honor mentioned, 8III, I don't think that's the proper.
18 triple I.
18, section
Yeah.
18A triple I followed Your Honor when you pointed
Yes, yes.
out, I read it. It says clearly identify any promotional offer, including any discount, premium, or gift, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't think, Your Honor, this provision captures the situation I am concerned about. This section only refers to a promotional offer. A promotional offer is a discount. It means a promotion. This does not cover just an ordinary
But
sale.
also, if I can add, Your Honor, also in section D, E-mark, section D.
D,
Of the,
okay.
I'm sorry, section 18, letter D.
D.
D as in dog. E, 18. Yeah, 21 ba yan?
Yes, letter D, shall not allow the sale of
sorry.
regulated goods.
Sorry, my fault. It's section 21. Is it section 21? Excuse me.
Actually, Your Honor is correct. It's the letter D is more relevant.
Yes, the e-marketplaces and other digital platforms shall not allow the sale of regulated goods such as, but not limited to, chemical, food, and drugs without requiring them to provide their permits and license information and contractually obligating their compliance with sales procedures and limitations and other relevant conditions for the sale as may be imposed by any law or government or local government regulation.
Yes, that's the relevant provision, Your Honor. And maybe at the proper time, we can improve the wording to just be consistent with other existing laws, such that it's clear that if it is required elsewhere, not online, in other words, to have the proper permits, it should also have the proper permits.
Yes, I agree.
Gusto natin mangyari, Your Honor.
Yes, we're open to those suggestions
you.
and possible amendments.
Thank you. So I will go back. So I'll go back to the declaration of policy. And for the record, Majority Floor Leader, Your Honor, I'm willing to continue until it's time to stop. So just tell me, because in the interest of
Just a
as much
reminder,
as
we have an
can.
appointment.
Correct.
All of us have an appointment.
Correct.
In about 15 minutes.
Yes. So
We have to leave.
yes,
The dinner party of Joel Villanueva.
And-
He's hosting.
actually,
By the president, Mr. President. That's my story and I'm sticking with it, Mr. President.
That's correct.
I actually had one bite of the other meal there and had to come out. So if we can end in 12 minutes, I can have 3 minutes to eat
We can
that
end in
meal.
10 minutes, madam.
No,
10
so
minutes to 10
I'm
minutes.
saying, Your Honor, I will go on until you
Yes.
tell me to stop. I will try to
Okay.
cover as much. So let me proceed. And then my next question is, for DTI to cover all this, to ensure that this entire declaration of policy is materializes, by way of very clear provisions and enforcement. I haven't gotten to the end of this bill, but are there specific budgetary recommendations?
It's 1 billion. Here's the budget. There's a provision. Yes, there is a specific, I will retrieve it from the bill, the exact, but there is a provision for how much the
Okay.
initial budget that will be given. Below 1 billion.
I think it's just a provision that refers to the GAA.
Yeah. Still may 1 billion.
Yeah, because section 34 of the of the substitute bill just refers to the necessary amount. So that's what we wanted to know, because we will support, Your Honor.
It's here in section 34, which
Is
very basic. It basically states to carry out the provisions of this act. The amount necessary to carry out the provisions of this act shall be included in the General Appropriations Act. So it's a very
Yeah, so
a brief but general.
yeah, it doesn't tell us anything, Your Honor. So what we'd like, because we would really like to support this, is for DTI to give us, not today, but at some point during the deliberation, a breakdown, because this is a difficult job and we really want it to be done well. We want to be able to give all the support that we can. So sana mabigay. Meron na ho ba?
Yes, but they do have a breakdown, just for the information of Your
Okay.
Honor. They do have a summary breakdown of the 2024 proposed budget for the E-commerce Bureau.
Okay.
It totals 350 million, and it includes an MOE, 261, and personnel services, 74. And
So that's basically for the bureau, because the
Yes.
bureau will be the one to handle.
the
Sige.
E-commerce Bureau, yes. So basically about 350 million
Okay.
is their initial recommendation.
We'll park that and then I'll dissect it a little bit more later to ensure that DTI really has the support it needs, because we really want this to be a success, Your Honor. I'll move on, Your Honor. Again, for clarification, but I think this is in section 4, if I recall correctly. We are only covering business to business and business to consumers, correct? And
That
not
is correct,
consumer to
Your Honor.
consumer. Yes.
Yes.
So there is a definition of consumer to consumer in section 3E. I'm still looking at the committee report, so just correct us if there's a change in definition. Consumer to consumer transaction refer to one-off, petty, or occasional low-value transaction of an individual or group of individuals with another that are not made in the ordinary course of business of any party to the transaction, as may be defined by the guidelines. So I have an example, Your Honor. When I graduated from law school and was awaiting the results of the bar, my friends and I decided to clean up our parents' house. Take note, it's not our house, but our parents' house, and sell what we deemed was not needed in like garage sales. And that's kind of, it was a thing.
Yes.
So yung ganun ba, considered yan consumer to consumer? Eh, paano kung merong mag-platform na yun sila si garage sale? I don't know the answer, no?
Yeah.
I'm just throwing examples.
Yes,
na
I think, I mean,
DTI.
of course, but I think in that particular case, it's not something that's, when you look at the definition of, let's say, when it's something that is
Not-
repetitive, so when you talk about, let's say, I sell my garage sale, garage sale or something like that, obviously I guess that really falls under consumer to consumer, because it's not a repeating transaction. It's just a single transaction, person to person, and that's not what this act is looking to regulate.
Okay, that's good. And for the record lang, nagbago pala yung definition ng consumer to consumer na sa ating substitute bill. It's now refers to isolated transactions of an individual or group of individuals with another individual or group of individuals done for personal, family, or household purposes and not done in the ordinary course of business of any of the parties to the transaction. I think it means the same. I think the language was just professionalized a bit.
Yes.
So thank you, Your Honor. I'll probably think of other examples because I just like to ensure, I know from experience that the implementing agencies are guided by the debates that we have on the floor. And that's the only reason I'm, thinking of examples, asking His Honor or his resource persons from DTI for their own examples, because we want to be sure that clear itong objective natin for what exactly is the scope of consumer to consumer. So I'll give another example. What's that site? My kids use the site. I think it's Carousel. where
Carousel.
You can sell your secondhand pre-loved items. So the seller on Carousel and the consumer will not be covered, no? Kasi parang consumer to consumer, but the platform is covered, correct? Kasi si platform, yan yung business niya.
Yes, that is correct. The platform is covered. It's considered, it's by definition, it's not an e-retailer, it's an e-platform. So if the seller is not repeat
Yes.
seller, is
Well, I don't know about the word repeat kasi what if nagsispring cleaning siya every year, did every year repeat siya, but I would still say it's still a consumer to consumer.
yes.
So, because I think the key word there was that it is not done in the ordinary course of business, and it is
Yes.
more for personal or family purposes. So, I believe there's also a similar platform like Facebook Marketplace. So again, the people selling there are considered consumer to consumer, and then but the Facebook Marketplace itself is a platform that has to be regulated as
As an e-platform, yes.
as an e-platform, correct? Okay.
Yes.
So again, really, I'm just trying to think of different existing transactions that we can properly file, we at least it's clear moving forward. And the thing is, Your Honor, the truth is, this will this will innovate. It will keep changing. So it's good that at least with the examples we gave, if it's similar, then it's covered. And if it's not, there may be reason to have another law, an amendment. Sana hindi naman ganun kabilis, but we have to be prepared that that might happen.
Yeah, I agree. This is new territory, the ITA for internet transactions, and that's why it's good that we're debating now, so we can think of every possible scenario. And I'm sure it will continue. It's a market that's continuously evolving.
Since, Your Honor, my objective in bringing up the example was to define the consumer-to-consumer transaction. But in the course of that discussion, I put it out there that what do we now call those platforms that provide that that host, no? That parang host, that exchange between the consumer to consumer. So I'm now looking at the substitute bill. And there is a definition in L subparagraph I that e-marketplace refers to an online intermediary that allows participating merchants to exchange information about products or services, to enter into an electronic commerce transaction which may or may not provide information services about payment and logistics. So are we clear that the example I gave, like carousel, falls under that?
Yeah, yes, because it's exchanging. Yeah, it falls under the definition because when you talk about the exchange of information of products, it's more of like it connects to sellers, but it's not directly selling. It's not a direct retailer. So that would fall under a e-marketplace.
Kasi, Your Honor, yeah, it's okay. In the committee report, letter N, there is a different definition of e-marketplace. And there was a mention of specifics, no? I mean, they were named eBay, Amazon, Shopee, Lazada, Carousel, yun, nabanggit nga si Carousel, Facebook, Marketplace, Instagram, and TikTok, among others, whose business is to connect online consumers and online merchants. Parang maganda yun na may ganun yun. Kasi parang medyo, for me lang, Your Honor, parang medyo lumabo yung definition sa sa substitute bill. So again, I'll repeat,
Yes.
in the committee report, yes, Your Honor, did you want to say something?
Yes, actually, we to a certain extent we agree, but I guess we don't know in the future should these businesses change their business model. It would still be in the law, but they might not have the same not have the same business model further down the road. So it's up for debate, but that's the reason for taking the specific names out, is so that in the future, should any of these companies change their business model, it will not be specifically mentioned as an example in this law, in the ITA law.
Okay, I don't mind, Your Honor, if the objective, you're absolutely right. A lot of these these household names have changed their models. No? So it's not that we can just put it on record na as of this era, 2023.
Perhaps we have to specify, yes.
Yung negosyo ni Lazada ngayon, yun. Kung ano yung
Yes.
negosyo ni Carousel ngayon, yun.
Yes.
But I just ask His Honor to take a look at the definition, because I do like the wording, whose business is to connect online consumers. Parang medyo clear po yun eh. Mas clear yan sa akin eh. And then yung to facilitate the online, I do like that language. Again, at the
Yeah,
proper
that's,
time, we
yes.
can. I'm just giving His Honor heads up that that seemed to be pretty, it seemed to be clearer.
Yes, Your Honor, that point is very well taken, and
Okay.
I think that.
Your Honor, the birthday boy is asking us to continue the party in the other room, Your Honor.
Mr. President, we cannot, the president.
Oh, naman.
Yeah. Yes, no problem.
Yes, Your Honor, I am happy to continue on Monday. Thank you. Thank
Thank you
you.
very much.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Colleagues.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 1846. I so move, Mr. President.
There being no objection, motion is approved.
Mr. President, some admin matters with the consent of the body and pursuant to Section 33 of Republic Act number 8436 as amended by Republic Act number 9369 pertaining to an act authorizing the Commission on Elections to use an automated election system. I move that we constitute the Senate contingent to the Joint Congressional Oversight Committee on the Automated Election System and to elect the following members. Senator Amy Marcos as chairperson. Members, Senator Cynthia Villar, Senator Francis Tolentino, Senator Ramon Bong Revilla Jr. And from the minority, though the law provides for 3 members, but with only 2 minority members, I move for the election of Senator Aquilino Coco Pimentel III and Senator Risa Ontiveros. I so move, Mr. President.
There be no objection. Those aforementioned by the majority, they're hereby elected to the positions they're at, and congratulations.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move that we adjourn the session until 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Monday, August the 7th, 2023. I so move, Mr. President.
Before we adjourn, Majority Leader, just a reminder to our dear colleagues, in view of the Presidential Proclamation 297, which lifts the state of public health emergency throughout the Philippines due to COVID-19, and considering that almost all activities have returned to pre-pandemic levels, the Senate will no longer conduct hybrid hearings
Yes.
and meetings beginning Monday, August 7, 2023. And we shall revert back to our pre-pandemic practice of conducting hearings and meetings physically. This is in line also with the House of Representatives, because the House of Representatives, although they did hybrid sessions, they're now canceled all the hybrid sessions and hybrid hearings. We had face-to-face sessions, but we allowed hybrid hearings. So in line of that, we will also continue that practice, and we'll now go face-to-face for our conduct of public hearings. So only in case of force majeure or in occurrence of an emergency, however, the majority of the members may still allow to conduct hearings through remote electronic means based on Section 22 of the Senate. So if we have another pandemic, no, it's next week. Monday, boss, Monday. Huwag ka mag-alala. You can use your barong with the boxer shorts tomorrow, Senator Angara. So
I move for the previous question, Mr. President.
yes, there being no objection to the motion of the majority leader,